Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. I am Bart, and on this episode we are talking about the USMNT depth chart right now on May 15th, 2024, and how that plays into the selection of the Copa America roster for the summer. To talk about that is a man that you have come to grow and love on this podcast and on Twitter. It is Thomas, aka US Keeper. Thomas, how are you doing this evening?
Doing great, Bart. It's good to be here, and yeah, it's a roster talks. One of my favorite topics. So it's excited here. We'll be, Copa America is right around the corner. So it's exciting times.
It is exciting. It is also one of those exercises that I will legitimately say as I'm filling out, my personal depth chart. Looking back at some previous editions of the U.S. men's national team and realizing how lucky we are to have such a collection of good talent. It's not one or two players anymore.
No doubt.
Well, let's get into some news items. The first piece of news that we really need to talk about is the return of one of the most important players on this podcast. It is someone who you have not heard for a very long time, and he is making a triumphant return back to the airwaves. He comes with a degree in tow and everything. It is your friend of mine, Caleb, aka USMNT Corner. Caleb, welcome back.
Hey, I'm alive. I know I've had some super random tweets here and there when I have a little bit of time. Time is something that I'm learning to get used to again as I start to have a little bit more. But man, it is good to be back and to talk some U.S. men's national team. And what better way to come back than a roster episode? Everyone's favorites, my favorites, all the debates, all the pointless debates, because it doesn't matter because Greg doesn't listen to us. He does whatever he wants. And there's rumors he's bringing Sebastian Lletget back into the fold. Don't ask me my sources because there are none, but I'm excited to talk about the U.S.
That's funny you mentioned him because actually last week on the Total Soccer Show, they had a question of like which USMNT player should go to Wrexham. And they were like, well, none of the actual current players because that would be bad. But they actually mentioned Sebastian Lletget. And I'm like, you know what? That's actually not the worst idea. He's handsome. He's well liked for the most part. And yeah, send Sebastian Lletget to Wrexham.
He's got some
and I'm sure that will mean
outside the States.
Yeah, I'm sure that elevates him like at least 27 spots on other people's depth charts.
100% immediately.
Well, I am glad to have all three of us back together. So that is the fake piece of news. It is news. But the real news that we actually have to talk about before rosters is Jesse Marsch has been hired by the Canadian men's national team to be the MLS Canada men's national team head coach. The MLS part, I'm not joking, is part of his title because it is basically like an endowed professorship because the three owners of the Canadian MLS teams basically funded their ability to hire this man. That is how badly Canada soccer is hurting for money. Caleb, I'll let you answer this one first since you are newly back into the fold. Jesse Marsch to Canada. What do you feel about that?
I mean, it feels almost like a stab in the back. Dude, come to Canada? Anywhere else. But Canada or Mexico? We can't have Americans coaching Canada or Mexico. I mean, come on. Like the guy or hate him, that is our rival. And when I saw the news, like it just felt like, like I just got hit with a punch or something. I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. I don't love it. I'm happy for him. I mean, great job getting a new, gig. Like that's awesome. Can't talk on the TV forever, which he was decent at. But yeah, I don't love it. But hey, U.S. Canada matchups were good before. They will be even better now.
That's for sure. Thomas, I know, they moved on as John Herdman took the job at Toronto. I feel like Jesse Marsch kind of falls into a little bit of the John Herdman of like a little bit more motivational and hustle oriented than actual tactics. But does this work for the Canadian men's national team?
It's hard to say because I mean he definitely provides a ton of energy. I mean, there's I think he'll come in, he'll re-energize them. I just don't know. I mean, he's got some. I mean, they got logistical, financial issues. I mean, how much are they going to be able to do, right? In general, with that, I think that's weighing over them a little bit, and so it's kind of a reset. I mean, I think Marsch, I think he felt slighted because I do think he was considered for the, second, for this cycle for the U.S. And I think he was a little slighted by that. His comments, kind of the way he was kind of attacking certain things. It'll be interesting. I think it's good for the rivalry, right? Because we do need to have another rival, whether they're, in general, like Canada, Mexico, it's in a World Cup. It, kind of all fits together, right? It's a little logistical, situation. It's not. I mean, I don't want to see an American coaching over there, but good for him. I'm happy for him. I think, who knows if we even see Canada, at any point in any of these tournaments, right? But I think it'll be interesting to follow. And his tactics aren't, ones I like particularly, but we'll see how he works, that with the player pool he has, because they've got some talent, but they do definitely have some holes in that roster. So I don't know if he can get the best out of them. Again, I think short term, they could surprise. Long term, who knows? He kind of saw what he did, over in Europe. At some point, it kind of fizzled out. So
Yeah, well, I will get to see him up close and personal as I watch Canada take on Argentina in the Copa America match here in Atlanta. So welcome to Copa America, Jesse Marsch. You're playing Lionel Messi and Argentina. That'll be fun for them. They do qualify, by the way, directly to the quarterfinals of Nations League. So they achieved that somehow. I'm not entirely sure how that happened. I think they used rankings instead of the last 4 finalists this year. So Canada gets a pass to the quarterfinals, as does the US, Mexico, and Panama, who becomes now the 4th highest ranked team in CONCACAF. We don't have to go through those group phases in September and October. So that means we can really just have some fun and pay attention to Copa America, because we don't have to worry about, Nations League bullcrap this fall until November when it's just quarterfinals. That's fun. This Copa America seems to be a lot of people's benchmark assessment, to use a Georgia public education term, of Greg Berhalter. And I think it's fair to judge him based on, the next biggest tournament we're going to face. He obviously guided this team to a Nations League victory in March. So, a little bit to what Caleb's prediction was back in January, that we would do well in Nations League, build us up for a good Copa America run, not have a good run. Berhalter gets fired. The last part of Marsch getting hired is no longer, I think, in play. But, you did have a Nations League victory. I think it is fair to say, as Thomas and I talked about, it wasn't pretty. Not a great convincing win, at least over Jamaica. You did get a 2-0 in the final against a Mexico team that's still figuring out who the hell they are. But that all benchmark does come down to what you think your where you were before this, right? So where do we think we are now? Where do we think we can get? And look, you're going to be playing at least 3 teams probably that are ranked higher than you. And then if you want to consider like Uruguay and you're probably going to play Colombia or Brazil, maybe both of them. That's good competition. So Thomas, as far as Copa America as a benchmark for Greg Berhalter, what are some of the things that you just need to see him and the players, as we're going to talk about the players on this, do this summer?
I think the first 2 matches for the U.S. are very winnable matches. I want to see them dominate. This group has been together long enough. We need to see domination in these matches. And in in a way that makes sense. I mean, if Greg wants to try to implement something, 3-back system, whatever it is, and maybe you can play around with that a little bit against Bolivia and Panama. Like, you have that opportunity to do that. So you have to see a little bit of evolution of this team. We've not seen Greg do anything differently in his second, stint now with the men's team. And so what are we doing if he can't do that, right? I mean, because we have to get more out of this group, because I'm telling you right now, I mean, while it's a boring type of soccer, like it's how he's been playing it, you have to find the creativity. You have to be able to open the gates on this, like against better quality teams, right? And so I again, barely beating Jamaica, that's not good enough. Like, you can't, you've got to dominate those matches. Like, fine, you battled Mexico, that's fine, whatever it is, but like, Greg needs to be better. He needs to show something, and I'm not confident in it, though. I'm just not. There's nothing that indicates that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot of pressure on Berhalter to get this team to perform better than the sum of its parts. I think that's just all we've been asking for God knows how long. And I think the only time we've seen it truly are, here and there. I think the England game at the World Cup 2 years ago is probably just one example of them doing it, and the examples aren't many. But Caleb, there's also, I think, pressure, in my opinion, there should be pressure on the players to find a way to raise their level. And collectively, we've all sat here and looked at individually the players, being better than we've had in the past. Individually, they're having pretty decent seasons. Where do you see this player pool right now as we head into a busy summer with both a Copa America tournament and then the U23s playing at the Olympics?
I mean, I think you have to like where we're at as far as the player pool goes when you're comparing to what we're used to having. You put together a roster or a depth chart, and you used to, put your starting 11 down. And then after that, it was just like, well, maybe this guy, maybe that guy. And I think for the most part, we've got some pretty decent depth, and we've got a lot of talent, and guys are playing at big clubs, and they're having good seasons, and a lot of guys playing with just really good, really high confidence, a lot of form. So I think you have to like that. But like you said, they still have to put it together on the field. It's just, I'm a firm believer in making sure that your players are in positions to succeed, right? Putting your players in situations where they can find success. And I think the way, like, our players and the way they could play versus the way Berhalter wants us to play is like putting regular gasoline in a diesel truck, right? Like, it's just, I just don't see it. And to Thomas's point, where have we seen him adjust? It's just the same thing. And I do think we play better against better teams because that's the way he wants to play. They're not just going to sit back. We've all talked about the fact that he has no idea how to break down a team that wants to sit low and defend. So we're going to be playing better teams. They're going to play against us. They're going to want to play and run. They're not just going to sit back. And I think that does play into our hands a little bit more. So we might end up having some decent performances. But again, what is that really telling us about Berhalter? I don't know. I don't know where we're at. But to the original question, as far as the talent in the roster, I think you have to be okay with it.
Yeah, I think the piggyback question before we truly dig into the depth chart and the roster, and it's fair to ask this question: is the roster, is the player pool better than it was 2 years ago, right? When we were entering a World Cup, I know obviously the timelines aren't exactly the same because FIFA put a tournament in the middle of the desert and had to change it to a winter tournament. But looking at where the roster was a month before the World Cup in 2022 versus where we think it would be now, personally, I think there are some areas where it's much better. I think there are some question marks still, but I think overall, I feel way more confident with the players that we're going to be able to deploy at Copa America than I did at the World Cup in 2022. And even then, I felt very confident in the players. It was just like I knew where ceilings were and where we could really excel.
I think we're better just by default, right? Like we're in a better place than we were 2 years ago simply because, the roster's fairly unchanged. And for the most part, like your core guys, but they're 2 years older. They're 2 years more experienced. They're 2 years, of growth for some of them very positively. So I think we're just kind of in a better spot, simply because our core guys are not youth internationals anymore. I mean, think about it. We went to the World Cup with a U23 squad. And now we've got guys 24, 25, 26 that we're counting on. And so I think that just puts you in a better spot.
Yeah, Thomas, that's a great point about the experience. 2 years older for a lot of these guys, most of them, to be honest. How does that factor into the expectations we should have for this team?
It should be higher because you're looking at 17 players that were on the World Cup. They're
I think
probably,
that's the number. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you're going to see, and again, based on if they're healthy, 17 players returning. That's awesome. Like the expectation need to be high for that because they've had experience, they've had all these things, they've gone through battles together, they've gone through World Cup together. Like this is, this is a good benchmark moment for them. Can they, meet it? And again, if you're talking a 26 player roster, then you have a couple other players that maybe weren't available because of health that are on this roster, right? And so that alone, it's like the excuses are out the window because you've got the best available talent there. And so what you can do with it and what you can work with, you've got to be able to do that. And my criticism of Berhalter is that he can't get the best out of these guys. He's just not that good of a coach. He cannot, as Caleb spoke earlier, put these players in the best positions for success. That's it. All the other stuff doesn't matter, right? I don't care if it's ugly doing it and you get the result. I'm fine with that. But you have to find that piece of it. And we got a lot more talent than we ever have collectively here. The depth isn't questioned in some certain positions, but the expectations should be high on this. And it's not going to be easy, but that's kind of what it's a test they need heading into the World Cup in 2 years.
Well, and that's again the whole point, I think, of this Copa America and why even before we knew we wanted to host it, that we all as fans wanted us to be in this tournament is because we knew that the ability to get meaningful quality opponents and meaningful matches was going to be very limited based on the unfortunate realities of hosting a World Cup. So playing in this tournament is one of the only times we're going to face actually good competition before 2026 rolls around. And then you add to the fact that we're hosting the damn thing. You would hope that would make a difference. Before we get too in the weeds, let me just lay out kind of how we did this. Basically, it's a depth chart. I didn't put a specific number of each position out there because some positions are a little fluid, if you will. Obviously, center back, yes, you can have a left and a right side of center back, but at the end of the day, you have center backs playing. Some positions we listed more than others because it's more fun to talk about the extended depth chart for the forwards or the goalkeepers in some instances. So it's not an exact science. We just kind of put together the players that we felt were true, that we felt confident in their place, if you will, on the depth chart in the power rankings at each position. So it's not one or two deep or necessarily. It's just kind of where we feel players are at this point. Let's, though, start with the goalkeepers because this was an interesting one when I looked at all of our list, and we all have Matt Turner, we all have Ethan Horvath, and then we all have some weird combination of Gagla Slonina, Roman Celentano, Patrick Schulte, other young guys. My question here is first to Caleb: is you have Gaga as 3, you have Brady at 4, Patrick Schulte is 5. Schulte obviously at Columbus, the reigning MLS Cup champion, and Chris Brady at Chicago doing great things. All 3 of those guys that you listed after Horvath are Olympic eligible. You're probably only taking, I doubt you're using any of the extra alternate spots on goalkeepers. But if you're only taking 2 goalkeepers to the Olympics, do you think Gaga, Brady, Schulte, do you think they're making a Copa America roster?
Probably not. When I looked at my depth chart, it was somewhat separate from Copa America, because when I'm looking at depth chart, I am looking at simply where do I think these guys rank talent-wise. I'm not taking into consideration what is Berhalter doing with these guys, where does he put them, does he play them, where are these guys going to be playing this summer? I'm just looking at who do I like in these spots, who do I think is at the highest level at the moment or has the highest potential. And so that's kind of the way I tackled this as far as the depth chart. It was like a 40-man roster in baseball, and I'm just trying to put the best players there, if that makes sense.
That is a good point. So Thomas and I both have Roman Celentano on our depth chart. I have Slonina above him, but kind of like you said, I think Slonina is a better goalkeeper, but Celentano I think is an interesting name. He's not U23 eligible. So Thomas, a lot of people would include Drake Callender. You have him as a toss-up, basically, if you're looking at who's not a U23 prospect. Where do you lean, Celentano or Callender versus on assuming that Schulte, Slonina, Brady, they're probably getting called up for the Olympics if they're able to. So Celentano, Callender, what is the differentiating factor between those two guys?
Well, I lean towards Celentano. Callender, I think he just gets pulled into the mix only because he's playing on a team with Messi. And part of the reason for it, obviously, after we get past the Copa America and the Olympics, I think your third spot goes to one of the young keepers. I think it's going to be a battle for, in that position for them. But I think that's, that's kind of how I did this specific position, was more related to who would probably likely get called in to the national team piece of it. A little bit because it gets a toss up too. Because again, with the Olympics, it's not guaranteed that they'll be released. So that's that piece of it. It's a nice problem to have, having 3 U23 players, in the mix for goalkeeper. That being said, I don't see any of them, getting in there at this point. So, I go with Celentano. I'm not, Drake Callender. I don't know. Again, I think it's the Messi factor. I'm not overly impressed with him in general, but hopefully we don't have to worry about a third keeper.
I think Callender, when you look at he's the typical MLS goalkeeper, you know what I mean? Like a typical MLS lifer. Nothing wrong with that at the goalkeeper position, but he just doesn't quite rise to previous guys we've had like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're right. He's not. He doesn't have that upside in general. He does it fine. I think if in a pinch, he'd come in there. He'd probably hold his own against most CONCACAF teams, no issues. But again, against some of the better clubs that we'll be seeing here in Copa America and the World Cup, I would rather take my chances with one of the U23 young guys in that third spot at that point, because I think, to me, everything shifts after the Olympics, right? I think you phase some of these guys out, and that's it. I know it's weird, but that's kind of how it works. The mid-cycle kind of shift, right, of some of these youth players making a push for the big run for the World Cup.
Yeah, and I think for me, Celentano is a year older than Olympic eligible. So it just is one of those like, well, technically he's not Olympic eligible. He's still a young guy with a whole lot of his career left ahead of him, playing for a very good team at FC Cincinnati, and someone who is, in my opinion, really playing well, even in a good team that is, goalkeepers look good on good teams. I think that's why Callender gets picked, because he's playing on a really good team. We don't need to spend too much more time on it, but I think I just want to remind people that goalkeepers have a longer shelf life than other positions. And so when we're talking about Slanina, Brady, Schulte, Celentano, like that could change in 5 years. But I think that it's fair to say all of those guys are probably going to be the mix for the 2030 cycle, if you will. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's the first time we've been able to identify keepers this early. Also, key point, none of us had Zach Steffen, probably because he's not as good of a goalkeeper anymore. Weird how that worked. Let's move on to the center backs. A lot of similar names. Thomas and I had basically the same group of 6. I had Chris Richards, Tim Ream, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Miles Robinson, Mark McKenzie, and Austin Trusty. Thomas, with Richards, Ream, CCV, he has McKenzie over Robinson and then Trusty at 6. I think the difference between McKenzie and Robinson are negligible, and it just depends on how you want to fill out your roster. But Caleb has a very interesting name on his depth chart. He has Chris Richards, John Brooks, Miles Robinson, CCV, Tim Ream, McKenzie, Trusty. So explain yourself, sir.
Hey, he was on the preliminary roster.
He was.
He was on there. And again, when I'm doing this depth chart, I'm still thinking to myself, like, what are the most talented guys? And whether Berhalter can squash his, pettiness and whatever happened, nobody knows. John Brooks to me is still tops as far as center backs go. Like if I had control, like I would play him. He's had a little bit of a dip, but he's still playing high level. Started like 18 matches this year. Naturally left-footed. Scored 2 goals this year. I still have him in there again as far as just purely just looking at pure talent, just putting guys in where I think they rank. And then as far as the ranking 1 to 7 on mine, Miles, CCV, Ream, McKenzie, Trusty. I mean, we're splitting hairs. Every single one of these guys, I'd be comfortable with playing. If we had a match tomorrow and I had to put one of those guys in,
Yeah, Thomas, I think it's interesting that we have, you and I have 6 center backs. I think we all agree that Trusty's probably the one that we're most or at least comfortable with, and most probably, if he was included, well, I don't know about that. Despite what people on Twitter say that just because he plays in the Premier League, he's clearly the best center back that we have an option for. But I think it's interesting, Thomas, you and I both have Tim Ream as number 2. Caleb obviously has him lower. I think, not to speak for you, Thomas, but right now, Tim Ream's still number 2. But I really hope that changes quickly.
Yeah, he's on the fence, right? Because to me, he hasn't been playing a lot with his club. He's getting older, all these little things here, right? It's all starting to come together a little bit. So now I'm getting a little nervous with Tim Ream, right? He's there at 2, but barely. All it takes is someone else to step up, right? In that piece of it. So does it mean that CCV's healthy and Richards plays on the left side, which I actually prefer, what I would prefer to see as my center back pairing? Maybe in a 3-back system, he has a role, maybe not. I don't know, but he's holding on by a thread for me.
Yeah.
And, I think he's a player that can offer a lot to a team that's been there. I think he's a player that could come in as a sub, the last 5 minutes, whatever it is, to help hold down a lead. But he's losing a step. You know what I mean? We're seeing it. He's not playing for club right now for Fulham. I think there's some telling things going on here. And Greg, again, just like I said earlier, with players coming into the mix, They're going to be players coming out of the fold, and I think Ream's going to be one of them. I mean, because he kind of has to be a little bit because he's just not getting the playing time and at that level. So it's.
I think Ream is going to go from like on my depth chart from number 2 to like completely off it after Copa America. Part of that is because the one thing that he has over all these other guys is experience, right? And that is a legitimate, he has more experience both at the club and national team level than any of these guys. But after this, do we really need an experienced guy to lead this team when a guy like Pulisic, Turner, even, other guys in the back line like Jedi Robinson and other guys on the team? I mean, hopefully Tyler Adams and McKinney and all these guys, they're going to have 2 major tournaments under their belt. I don't need Tim Ream to be there because he, has seen what a World Cup is. So we're going to have guys who know what a World Cup is. We're going to have guys who have been through a Copa America run. So from that standpoint, specifically, like his value will greatly diminish. And I'm with you. I think the writing is very much on the wall for Tim Ream, in that it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't return to Fulham next year. Or if he does, he's certainly not playing match in and match out. It doesn't seem like he's at that level anymore. But can he do it for the U.S. for a couple of games? Sure, I think so. But I would love to see Chris Richards plus not Tim Ream as soon as possible. I think we all agree that CCV is up there. Caleb, I know you still have love for Miles Robinson, but I think we all have the same group of players. And I think having 6 center backs that are relatively serviceable is probably better than we've had in a lot of times throughout the U.S. men's national team history. Moving to fullbacks, obviously the name atop all of our lists, Sergiño Dest, is hurt. So that shakes up things when we talk about the Copa America roster. The second name, Jedi Robinson, he's there. I think now he's the most important defender we're going to have going into this tournament, just because he is going to be so integral into the attacking phase of play for us that now that Sergiño's out. We all 3 have Joe Scally, and then it kind of becomes a mess of players who are somewhere on the depth chart. So my 4 through 6 is Brian Reynolds, Christopher Lund, DeJuan Jones. Thomas mirrors me, DeJuan Jones, Christopher Lund, Brian Reynolds, Caleb, Lund, Jones, Reynolds. So we have Reynolds listed. He hasn't really been a big part of the first team. He had Gold Cup experience last year, but with Sergiño Dest out, how does that affect his place in this depth chart? And we'll have part 2 of this question when we get to the Copa America roster. But Thomas, Reynolds right now, I mean, does he really have a place to play on this team?
I don't think he does. I mean, I think he, again, after we get through this, it'd be a different conversation. I think we, flip things off. Maybe Jones drops off it. Because you've got it. 2 years where you can start integrating these players, right? But you do have a goal to do that as well. And what I don't know really is where, if there's any players that are going to be on both squads, right? I don't expect it to be, but I think Reynolds, he's 21 years old. I think the Olympics is a good spot for him right now. Mm-hmm. He's to me, he's done the right things. I think the progression is right. I just don't think this is his tournament. But I could be proven wrong too on that.
Yeah, I kind of think Reynolds belongs at the U23s right now, and that's fine because we need a good right back, and he can be a very good right back at the Olympics. Caleb, for you, what puts DeJuan Jones ahead of Brian Reynolds? I think we all see Christopher Lund as above Brian, but for you, what puts DeJuan Jones ahead of Brian Reynolds?
So for me, DeJuan Jones he's just solid. He can play both sides, plays left back all the time at the club level. And I've seen him a good bit. Like I'm looking back and I'm thinking, all right, I feel like I've seen Brian Reynolds play twice in the last year. He's playing in the Belgian league. It's good level. But again, when you get down to like on this depth chart, if you're looking at the weight that they hold for their position, Sergino Dest, if you've got a pie chart, he's got a huge slice. Anthony Robinson, huge slice. And then Joe Scally's a little bit smaller. Christopher Lund, DeJuan Jones, Brian Reynolds, they're on that pie. It's just a smaller slice. You're kind of splitting hairs there. I like Brian Reynolds. Tall, he's big, athletic, gets forward really well. But do I watch Westerlo weekly? No. So can I say that, I really, or, do I watch DeJuan Jones play weekly? No. I'm just kind of going based on recent performances for the U.S., what I like about them. So, can I flip them
Well,
back?
let me say something controversial. It's not like the Belgian league and MLS are wholly different in terms of like the actual level of competition.
Wait,
right?
whoa. Is Belgium in Europe? Because if they are, it's a billion times better.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I wouldn't prefer more players to play in Belgium. I'm just saying that, like, 100%. It's not like there's, it's not like you're playing. Anyway, players matter, not the league, and that's all I'll say. Right. But yeah, I think Brian, to me, fits at that U23 level. I'm with you that DeJuan Jones, to me, makes more sense at Copa America, and to me makes more sense above Brian because he has played with this team. And at some point you have to go with what you've seen. And I'm with you. I've seen DeJuan Jones play for the U.S. men's national team more frequently and probably a little bit better than I have Brian Reynolds, certainly recently. Midfielders. So we've covered all the defenders. Let's move to the midfield. Now, we kind of just grouped all of them together, mainly because if you want to split hairs about defensive midfielders or not, you can. But there's a lot of guys who we've seen can kind of do both. And we listed a good mess of all of them. So we included all of them. I'm going to say my first four because I think those are the ones that we care about. I have Weston McKennie as my number one midfielder. Gio Reyna's number 2, Adams 3, Musa 4. Now, Thomas, you have Gio Reyna listed number 1, McKennie 2, Musa 3, Adams 4. So obviously some changes in actual, standing for you. Caleb has McKennie, Reyna, Musa, Adams. So I guess what we're looking at here is the top 4 are pretty much written. And I know this is going to make some of the Luca De La Torre and Malik Tillman or even Johnny Cardoso truthers out there upset. But to me, it's just very clear those are the top 4 midfielders we have. But Thomas, I'm curious why Gio Reyna is your number 1 midfielder.
I mean, I look at it this way. He's a game changer when he's out there. I think we can compete against high quality teams with him on the field because he helps push the attack. He creates different everything, right? He's really the only player right now that is consistently able to do that, in that position. Tillman, we're seeing a lot of great things from him, and hopefully he can develop into that. But for me, Reyna he's a game changer, right? There's no other player that really can do what he's doing, in my opinion, for the U.S. In the midfield. Because in my opinion, you can mix and match some of these players, and you lose some stuff, but I still think they're effective if you're mixing and matching some of the talents.
So, Caleb, why is Weston McKennie your top midfielder?
I mean, I've got him number 1 because for me, I think he's the best all-around player in the pool. He can do it all. He can play defense. He's press resistant. He can finish. He's good in the air. He can go left, right. We've seen him play right back for U.S. We've seen him play right back for Juventus. We've seen him play center mid, wing. He's just for me, when I look at how I would attack certain teams, and I've got a midfield 3, he is the common denominator. I won't take him off the field, right? Like if I'm looking at a team that I think is going to sit back and I want to break them down, I want to go with a bit more creativity. I might go, Gio, Johnny, and Wes, right? Versus a team that's going to be a bit more on the run and we're going to have a little bit less of the ball. maybe we're a little bit more defensive, I'm going to go Tyler Adams, Yunus Musa, and Gio Reyna, or I'm sorry, Weston McKennie, right? Like he's in there no matter how I decide to set the team up. And so for me, that's why he's number one. And then also, I mean, just his leadership and energy on the field.
Yeah.
He's a freak. He is.
I'm going to just say that for me, Weston's number one is because I can guarantee he'll be healthy. And I hate to just continue to pull that out on Gio, but Homeboy hasn't played for Nottingham Forest, a team bound for not great things in the Premier League. And at some point, you have to believe what club coaches see. While he is very good for us, I think it's fair to say he's a little. His reliability ranking is not a 10 out of 10. Let's just put it that way. Gio's is not. And so that's why I have Weston at number one. Behind that, we all have at number 5, Malik Tillman. And I think this is a guy who has really improved his stock over the past season. Obviously playing for the champions PSV. They went undefeated, made a run in the Champions League. That is helpful. We all have Johnny Cardoso at 6. I think that is just because he's the only guy who we trust to play defensive midfield. Thomas, is that fair? Like that's the dude, and no one else. I don't, outside of maybe Yunus Musa or Weston McKennie, I don't trust anyone else to play in that defensive midfield role.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think he's earned the spot. Until with his club team for sure. I still want to see more with him in the national team, though. I think that's my biggest thing. We haven't seen enough of him, right? And we've seen glimpses of it. And he missed the last window, I think, because of injury. Like, what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, players can play great with your club. They can't play great with their, international team, or vice versa, right? So I think that's the, where we need to see it, right? It's on paper, it's fine, but in practice, we haven't seen it enough to be comfortable with it. At least I have.
Now, Caleb, you have Luca Della Torre next. He's the guy that for me has kind of fallen off because Malik Tillman has improved so well, and we have Johnny Cardoso coming in. So it's just like I look at it and go, those guys to me are more dynamic players. But I admit that I was never a huge Luca Della Torre fan because I never really saw it on the field for the U.S. But he's at number 7 for you.
Yeah, I think a year ago, 6 months ago, he's probably there at 5, 6. I think we all kind of had that. But I've got Tillman and Johnny over Luca. He's still in there. He's firmly in the 10 or so that we all have. Simply because he's a common name. We know it. We've seen it. He's what you're going to get from him. But I think he is who he is at this point, and he's a good option. I don't think he's ever going to get into the starting conversation. If you have to play him, you're not scared to death. I think that's how we all kind of look at him.
Now I have next to my list Brendan Aronson. Y'all have him listed as a winger. I have him as a midfielder. So I'm curious, Thomas, why you think Brendan is still going to be classified as a midfielder or as a winger / attacker when you see it on that roster drop.
I just think that I think the lack of depth at the wing is kind of why I put him there. And obviously he can play both positions with high energy. So I think that's where some of the subjectivity makes it a little bit challenging. But for me, it was more about the depth element of it. I think we have a lot more depth at center, mid than we do at winger. So that's kind of what's my thought on that.
Well, as you put Gianluca Busio, Tanner Tessman, Paxton Aronson, and Roskas Pustas. I'm going to have to learn how to say that name a little bit better. All in the midfield group as well. Caleb, you also included Jack McGlenn and Diego Luna. I will just say that there are a lot of those names I did not include because I still very much consider them U23 players. And so while they might be pushing for first team minutes, I'm not quite sure they are there yet. But I think this is a great example of just the depth we have. Now, the name that is the most off the wall, Caleb, is Luciano Acosta, who is my least favorite player in MLS. So I'm going to have to ask you, why
Same.
are you doing this to me personally?
I can't stand the
Can't even
dude.
talk about this man.
I can't stand watching him play because he does the same thing to every single team, especially Atlanta. But he's just a diva, and he dives all over the place, and he cries and he whines. But there is zero doubt that the dude is so talented. And there were reports 6 months ago or so, a year ago, whatever, that he's looking to become U.S. eligible. And if he does that in the next 6 months or so, I think he's firmly within the top 10 center mids. He'll be 30 in like 2 weeks. So he's not too old. He's extremely creative. I mean, you talk about going down to, Jamaica or Panama, or you go somewhere down in CONCACAF and they're going to sit low and you got to break them down. I'd love to have him on the field. So that's why, again, I'm looking at just talent. Where do I think guys sit? Who would I trust? Not necessarily who's going to be in the upcoming roster,
Personally, morally, and ethically, I can't include him on my depth chart. But no, I think it is interesting to look at still the ability for, and we saw this with Julian Gressel, and I don't think he necessarily plays into anything. Obviously, we didn't mention him at fullback, but Acosta's kind of that, like, well, he's a very good MLS player. And if he were US eligible, it's not the worst type of person to have to pull out, especially if you're like talking about a Gold Cup. That could be fun. Let's close out the midfield and move on to wingers. Now, controversially, we all have Christian Pulisic and Tim Weah listed number 1 and 2. And Thomas, I think this is I think you mentioned it. This might be the weakest and least deep group because I have Haji Wright at 3. You have Luka Koleosho. Caleb has Brendan Aronson. But, I mean, behind Pulisic and Weah, yeesh.
Yeah, it's not a good situation. I mean, I tried, I think we all probably did this, but I tried to, one player per position. So, I mean, I think that maybe this, silver lining is like an Aronson, like a Wright, right? They can play multiple positions, which makes it, provides a little bit more depth with, in general. It's not their primary position, maybe that they're in or could play against, but it is. I mean, the other depth we have is very young. It's clearly youth talent. That has had moments and done well, but certainly is not really had the opportunity to play at the national team level, and I think that it's just concerning. The part of the reason I put Luka on there is because he's a dual national, is that we just don't have that depth. I mean, he's injured right now, so I mean, I don't think he's even in the conversation. But yeah, the depth is not great.
We really, I hate to say it, but we really do need JJ Watt to do some recruiting for us out there at Burnley and get him to commit to the U.S. national team. Caleb, I think for me, a lot of the names we all three have Kevin Paredes and Taylor Booth. You and I have Alex and Dejas, and Thomas does not, and I'm not blaming him for that, but why do you still think that Centejas plays a role? And granted, he's, 5th and 6th on our depth chart, so it's not like he has like a big role. But what about him makes you still consider him?
Yeah, I think, we've touched on it. The lack of depth at the winger position just kind of puts him in there by default.
He can play winger. That counts for something.
Yeah,
right?
And he can, and he can play. He can play on the left. He can play on the right. He's shown like he's a skillful player. It's not like he's garbage. He had some rough showings for the U.S., but I think I'm thinking over the last couple of weeks, and I've seen him scoring goals. Might be finding some form right now, so I have him in there. But it's not necessarily because, oh man, I love this guy. It's more of who else are we going to put in there? You know what I mean? And that's the same thing. Yeah. Just like Thomas said with Brendan Aronson, he's playing a lot of midfield right now.
I want to say for
But-
Brendan, I think a lot of people have been bagging on him, and I'm not saying he did, but like he had a better end of the season than I think he had at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I mean, and he's had some ups and downs, and so he's going through it, right? I mean, guys, that happens, and he's young, and it's, you know, you don't want to say expected, but it's not surprising.
Mhm.
And we've seen him for the U.S. play midfield and winger. He can play both easily, and so he's one of those. If he's listed at midfield, and then we see him in his first appearance, and he's coming on as a winger, like no one's shocked by that. But I put him in my winger group because of the lack of depth, and then like I said, Zendejas is in there. Just
You
again,
also have Griffin Yao, which is a good shout. But I want to ask you also about Taylor Booth because you have him at 4. Thomas and I have him at 6. So why do you have him so high? And then I'll let Thomas respond with why he doesn't have him as high.
because I like him better than Zendejas. Griffin Yao, we just haven't seen him with the senior team. Not that I know of. I didn't really look into that, but he's banging in goals left and right. It seems like every freaking week we see it. And I like that kid. And then I've got him over Kevin Paredes because Paredes just seems, there's a lot to like, but he seems so frantic on the field at times. So I've got him above that. And so, 4, 5, 6, 7, it's all fluid. And he's 4 because who else is there? It's something that I would really, really hope to see. Which, just like we were talking about left back being such a problem for years, striker was a problem for years, and now look at our striker list. We'll talk about it later, but it's fairly healthy.
Yeah, for me, it was one. He's just coming back from injury, so it kind of put that. But I kind of did all my kind of wingers and pairings, right? So I kind of did the pairing that would probably see, in an ideal situation. So and I start with the left back, so he could be 5 or 6 really on mine. Honestly, on a Zendejas type of piece, if I didn't put Luka in there, I would have. Zendejas makes my list.
Yeah.
He's probably in a 4 spot because again, he's been with the team. He provides, speed, creativity. He just had a little bit back again. Player that's had bad luck with an international, team, and he's been doing well with the club. So is that the players he's been played with, in the Gold Cup, C
But
squad.
I got to be honest, a little bit of it I think does have to do with the fact that the Gold Cup team is just not very good.
Right, you know what I mean? Like I don't think he can lead the team, but
Yeah.
I think he's a good player that can be put into the mix, right? So we look at all these players that are kind of on the cusp, right? Like remove so and so and replace it with someone else, right? Put Zendejas in on the right or left side with either Pulisic or Weah, whatever. He's going to get more opportunities, right? Because there's just more talent around that. Where he was probably the more focused on a player to watch a little bit more, and he just didn't get the bounces and a little bit of luck that probably he needed from a mentality perspective. So yeah, I mean, I don't really think Booth or Paredes is really ready to play on the wing side for the U.S. quite yet. Again, goes back to after the Olympic cycle, and then I think if they stay healthy, I think they'll have their opportunities.
Well, to tell you about the state of our winger pool, I have Haji Wright at number 3. And part of that is because when he's been played, kind of not necessarily as a left winger, but on the left side, it's been really productive for the U.S. Obviously, he can still play striker. So if I'm building a roster, I'm thinking, okay, well, Haji gets a preference because he can play as a left winger, but he can then also be a backup striker, which is, I think kind of why he ended up making that Nations League roster. But he's also scoring a whole lot, and he does play on the left side for Coventry. And I think that, to me, is important, is he is playing well at a decent competition level and being consistent. He's been consistently scoring everywhere he's been at the club level, and he's saved us a couple times. I also think, for me, Haji is a different type of player than all the other guys who are kind of small, to be quite honest. And Haji provides a different just physical profile out there. And again, you're scoring a lot of goals. It's better than anyone else who's playing that position. Zendejas is scoring goals, but is Liga MX isn't that much better than MLS, so it's I don't know. But speaking of Hadji, we'll move on to the forwards. So we all have Folair and Balogun at number 1. I don't think that's a surprise. Y'all have Sargent, and I have Pepe at number 2. So I'm just going to say I think Pepe, for me, has proven more as a U.S. men's national team striker than Josh Sargent has. Certainly from 2022 to now. Now, part of that is because Josh Sargent has been not on the field. I think if I was remembering correctly, he has not played for the U.S. men's national team since the 2022 World Cup. And even in that tournament, he got hurt. So availability is a skill. And unfortunately, Josh Sargent for the U.S. men's national team doesn't have that. And it seems like he's been battling injury and fitness with Norwich all season. But I also think Pepe is a better pure striker right now than what Sargent is. But Sargent is a better all-around player. So it's like a kind of a toss-up for me. But I still have Pepe as my number 2. I'm bringing him if I have to. But Thomas, I'd love to hear why I'm wrong and that Josh Sargent deserves to be above him.
Again, when it comes to strikers for me, it's always, what have you done for me lately? That's, it's a very old school, it brings me back to, 2010 World Cup, when they selected, Bundle and Gonzalez. I'm blanking on his name. I say Hernandez. I'm blanking on his name, but another striker to the World Cup because they had injuries, right? And so to me, it's who is hot right now. I mean, Balogun, again, cleared number 1, but Sargent, not so much lately, but he's had a pretty good season. But again, his reliability is in question, right? And so to me, that's why he's there, because of just that he's done a lot, for this season. Pepe hasn't been playing as much recently, and really has kind of fallen down the depth chart, for PSV. So I think that's kind of my reasoning and rationale for the depth chart. But again, a lot of these guys can flip pretty quickly, and we've seen them flip pretty quickly here over the last couple of years in terms of where they fall in the forwards, striker depth chart.
Well, we all have basically the same group of names. I included Hadji Wright as a winger, so he's not on my forward depth chart, although he would be. And interesting enough, the 5th name basically on all of our lists is Brandon Vasquez. Now, Caleb, I think he's cooled a little bit since his initial move to Monterrey. But what about Brandon Vasquez makes him a better option than some of the other names that kind of just exist in the U.S. striker hat?
I think when you get down to the bottom of any type of depth chart, you're looking at guys that you like. And, because your first 2 or 3, those are the guys that are going to play. Those are the guys that are going to start, the rotational guys. Once you start getting down to 4 to 5, again, it's personal preference. Who do you like? I mean, I could have gone like a Pefok. I've never been a big fan of Jordan Pefok. So I go Brandon Vasquez. There's a little bit of, Atlanta United history there. Also, I just like him.
Open Cup
good
hero. Yeah.
Open Cup. Yeah. I mean, we've seen him bang in good goals. He's athletic. He's got some silky moves sometimes. He just surprises you every now and then. He's got good size. So he's just kind of there. But, if he drops off, it's not like I'm losing my mind,
Yeah, I think for me, I feel the same of Vasquez is that, I don't know, I just like him more. Thomas, I mean, what's your reasoning to have Brandon Vasquez on this? I mean, he hasn't scored in the 2 games in the Clausura season. He, like I said, he's cooled off, but what about him makes you still prefer him?
Yeah, he's a little bit of a different striker for me. He's not he's more of a poacher type striker. Again, to me, end of a match, put him in there, right? Do some damage, get a header on the ball, something of that nature. Like it's just different, right? And we know we can have that composure. We've seen him do it in those big moments and be able to put those goals in. So I think when you look at that and you're looking at the depth chart, again, that's the uniqueness, right? You got to find these players that can do different things, play different positions, and then, and again, he's pretty quality in that respect. And so with strikers, that's key, right? If you're going to bring them in, that's their job, is to score, right? And so, and he's done that pretty consistently. And he does create a little havoc there. So that's why he's on my list. Again, he may have been higher if he had been a little hotter, but he's cooled off for sure, but he's still there for me.
Well, I think we've basically covered the depth chart and mentioned a lot of names. We're going to take a break, but on the other side of that break, we're going to pick a 23-man roster for Copa America and then add a couple players to that as we possibly get to 26. So we'll be right back after the short break. Okay, hydration break is over. I did have a hydration break in a match this weekend. A coach asked for it because they only had enough players to field a team, and they're like, "Can we have a hydration break?" And as a referee, I will always allow for a hydration break. I love it. All right, so we just talked about our depth charts, which again, we're not limited to any amount of numbers, just listing players that we felt had legitimate or somewhat legitimate or even somewhat far out shots to make this national team. But let's talk about what we actually think a tournament roster would look like. And the one we have to really plan for is Copa America this June and July. Now, I think it needs to be said that obviously the Olympics is on the radar. And I think ideally the Olympic eligible players would be released by their clubs and they're going to be able to go. But, we can't know that. We just don't have that information outside of like one or two players that we know aren't going to be going to the Olympics. So we can't really play like, oh, who's going, who's not. These Copa America rosters are pretty much, who we think is going to be a part of the Copa America tournament, who wouldn't be part of the Olympics. But it's an interesting thought exercise regardless, as we are probably 2 weeks away from this roster. I don't know if they're going to release the roster for the friendlies and then the tournament. I would imagine they're going to release the roster for the tournament, and that will also be the roster for the friendlies in that training camp. But regardless, obviously we know that as standard, a 23-player roster, but it has been rumored, not yet confirmed, that there will be 26 players allowed in the Copa America. I think it's like basically confirmed, but Copa America or / CONMEBOL hasn't officially said that. And they don't have to because official rosters aren't due yet. So we're going to do 23 and then mention some players that we think have shouts to be that 24th, 5th, and 6th player. So again, we'll just start with the goalkeepers. We all three have Matt Turner and Ethan Horvath. But it is interesting, Thomas, you have Chris Brady. I have Roman Celentano, and Caleb has anyone not named Dwight Callender. So, Thomas, I do think that Brady is an interesting shout for you because he is U23 eligible. He could be at the Olympics, but it does seem like Chicago's reluctant to let him go to that tournament.
Yeah, they're inconsistent with his release. They stated in the last U23 camp, I believe, that, it's not an issue. He just hasn't been called in. I'm not sure I fully buy that. Yeah, I mean, like you can't not call this guy into any of these camps, right? And so, to me, it's crazy. I don't think the Fire released them. I mean, no offense to anyone in Atlanta for listening, but it's a little bit what happened several years back when Atlanta wouldn't release Miles and Bello, I think it was, to January camp or just a non-FIFA window camp, and I think this is a little bit too. So I think US, they don't like it, right? They want the players they want, and so I don't think they release them for the Olympics. So I think they're going to bring them into Copa America. that's kind of my guess on that. I mean, kind of a little bit of a wild guess, but personally, I'd rather see him over Celentano or Calendar or anyone else for that matter. You know what I mean? Get these guys in there. If he's not going to be released, pull him in. Again, worst case, if you need your third keeper, then you're I don't think you're in a horrible spot with him anyway. So,
an interesting note on this is that I think we'll know very soon, actually, who will be released for the Olympics, because they're going to have a friendly on June 11th, the day before the US-Brazil game. They're going to have a friendly in Kansas City. They have not released broadcast information for that. So I don't know if this was something US Soccer was fully planning on doing or if it just somehow materialized. But I think we'll know at that point, right, who those Olympic players will be. And if Chris Brady is part of that. I personally am going to bring Celentano. I know, Caleb, you said not Calendar. So realistically, would you be okay with Roman Celentano or Chris Brady?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I just, third keeper, in all honesty, is probably not even going to be used. So for a young keeper to come in, get some experience, it'd be great. I'm done with the Drake Calendar show. He's fine. But some of the mistakes he makes, it's like, I feel like every week I turn on or I pull up Twitter and there's some stupid thing he's done.
I gotta agree with you. Like, the blunders he makes are,
it's like, what are you doing, dude?
He makes good saves, but he makes a lot of blunders, and
Yes.
it's getting to be Zach Steffen level of like, I can't trust you, man.
Correct. Yep, that's where I'm at.
Celentano for me, just because I do think he's the best American goalkeeper who will be available. I think Schulte and Brady have better shouts of being better goalkeepers, but I'm really hoping they're going to be in the mix for the Olympics. We'll see. Moving to center backs, we all have Chris Richards, obviously. After that, it is a little bit interesting. We do have Tim Ream. We have Miles Robinson. We have Cameron Carter-Vickers. But Thomas, you have McKenzie ahead of Robinson, but you have Robinson listed as maybe a bonus player if the 26-player roster is allowed. Why?
So I only did it because if it's 23, probably makes it for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that's kind of weird, but like, it's, I just think the right left thing come into play. I think the 3-back thing comes into play for me.
Interesting. Yeah.
When we look at that, it's so, yeah, I know it's weird because I probably would take, if it was 4, I'd probably bring him over McKenzie, because that means they wouldn't be running a 3-back sort of formation. I think that honestly is why I did it that way, which is with those extra players, I think Greg could actually bring a few extras in there that will allow that flexibility at the position there. So and I know Greg loves him, so I think he's on the roster anyway. So
interesting.
Yeah. So it's a little. Yeah, it's kind of a little convoluted there, but that's kind of like the, outside the box thinking on that.
Now, select. Caleb, your bonus player is Austin Trusty over Mark McKenzie, as is mine. So I'm curious what you think of with Austin Trusty versus Mark McKenzie.
I mean, it's a coin flip for me. I like them both. Austin Trusty's playing in the Prem. McKenzie's playing in Belgium.
Yeah.
I think I like the fact that McKenzie can go both feet easily. I like him. I like Trusty. I just put Trusty in there as a fifth center back, but not. I'm not going to argue for Austin Trusty over McKenzie or vice versa.
I have Trusty just because I think it's more like he gets called in. I don't know. Berhalter is weird about McKenzie. He says he really likes him, but then sometimes he gets left off and you're like, okay, but why? I also don't think that there's a need to bring in a fifth center back unless we are truly going to play a 3-back system, which I would like to see with Sergiño Dest out, but I don't know if that'll happen. So if you're not planning to do a 3-back system, I don't think you're bringing an extra player in the midfield or in the center backs. I don't think that would happen. Where I do think we could see an extra player is in the fullbacks. Obviously, we have Anthony Robinson, we have Joe Scally, we all have Christopher Lund, and then DeJuan Jones. Now, we all have, I have Brian Reynolds listed as my fullbacks, and that's just because I'd like to bring him to Copa America. I think he's a better option. But I also think he'll be at the Olympics, so I don't know if they'll get released for both. DeJuan Jones seems to be on it for everyone, but I do have a question for Thomas about Reggie Cannon being called in. That is a name we have not seen in a while for the U.S. men's national team. He is playing regularly in the championship. Yeah. Not Shaq Moore, not DeAndre Edlin. We're bringing in Reggie Cannon.
Yeah, this was he technically isn't. He's a 27th player on my list, so he's mentioned on there because of his versatility, potentially 3-back system situation, right? And I do have Pereira's as a fullback on my list, so that's kind of
yes, you do.
Yeah, as a backup type of situation as well, right? A little bit because I don't, I think there's some, Scally can play right and left, and I have DeJuan Jones who can play right and left too. So
and Paredes is interesting too because he could also be at the Olympics. He is Olympic eligible, and who knows what Wolfsburg will allow for that,
Yeah. I just think he does. I think the reason I like Paredes, I put him here because I think he's going to be a good left wing back. And I've lost, honestly, Christopher Lund, I've lost some trust in him a little bit. He hasn't done anything to wow me. He's just kind of being right now in general. So, which is maybe fine, but I just, to me, I think to have a couple dynamic players that can, play multiple positions with, Dest out, right? And you've got to have some of those options, and hopefully Greg is thinking of this too, right? When we're building a roster for a tournament, the versatility of a player that can play multiple positions at a high level, right? Not saying, well, yeah, we're throwing you back there because we have no other choice, right? So, so for Cannon, for me, I guess, he's, his stock has moved up a little for a player who couldn't get a club for a while. And Greg's always, he loves his fullbacks, and he did take 6 of the World Cups, right back to the World Cup. So I kind of figured, well, Greg may throw us a curveball on this one and throw in Reggie Cannon here, but probably unlikely. But I figured I'd throw a little wrinkle in there because Greg likes to do that as well.
Yeah, he does love himself some extra right backs specifically. Midfielders, we all basically have this we have this same 6, and then we'll talk about our bonus players. So we have Wes, Gio, Tyler, Eunice, Malik, Johnny. That is the same 6 across the board. I have Brendan Aronson. As I said, I see him as a midfielder, but the ability to play the wing, I think, would help him to the point where he might get picked as a winger. I just don't know. He's been weirdly on the bubble for Greg in the past couple of things, and I think if you're taking a 26-player squad, Brendan Aronson is for sure that 26, well, probably 24th player, to be honest. Thomas, you have Luca as your bonus player for the midfield spots.
Yeah, Luca for me, you mentioned earlier, he reminds me of a kind of like a Sasha Klesa player. He goes in there, he doesn't have blazing speed, but he's got quality skill, delivers a ball, kind of does just things in general that, aren't flashy, but he gets the job done, right? And so for me, I think he's a good, he's been on the squads, he's a good player. He's kind of fallen off a little bit, but again, for a 26 player, I think he falls into that right now. But again, he's a player that we might see fall off, from this depth chart and from other rosters going forward as, some of these younger center midfielders move up the depth chart.
Thomas, you do not have a bonus midfielder. Not Thomas, sorry. Caleb, you do not have a bonus midfielder. Is there a reason why you didn't think that your bonus player would come into the midfield?
Yeah, I mean, I just tried to put a 23 together, and then I thought, okay, if I'm going to bring 3 extra, where would I put them? And with those 6 in midfield, those are the 6 that are going to play. So a 7th, Luca is fine. Brennan is a good shout, but we'll talk about it later. I have him as a winger. So I was fine with those 6.
Well, let's talk about the wingers then. Caleb, you have Pulisic, Weah, Brendo. Thomas, you have Pulisic, Weah, Brendo, Haji. And then I have Pulisic, Weah, Haji, Kevin Paredes, because I'm not sure I know we're not really thinking about this, but I'm not sure he'll be released by Wolfsburg for the Olympics. So I'd rather make use of him because I do think he has a bright future for this team. And as we talked about, can play left back as well. Can also kind of play on the right. So versatility is good to see from a guy like that. And he's playing a lot in the Bundesliga, so I don't necessarily not trust him. I just think he needs to learn how to play at the international level, which he hasn't had enough opportunity to really do that. But I'm interested in, Caleb, you only are bringing 3 wingers. And I know you mentioned you list a lot of your forwards as being able to play on the wing. So is that why you're kind of using your bonus player spots on forwards instead of wingers and midfielders?
Yeah, I just have 3 wingers listed because, it's going to be Pulisic and Weah most likely, right? But in a pinch, I'm fine throwing Brandon Aronson out there, Malik Tillman as a winger if I need to. The fact that Haji and Josh are both hot, I wouldn't mind having Balogun play as a winger with one of those in the middle. But Haji, Sargent, Balogun, they can all play wing. I mean, you just have a ton of flexibility there.
Yeah.
And with the lack of depth that we have at the winger position, I didn't want to just throw somebody in there to get him in there as a winger in a restricted roster. I have a note with Tim Weah.
I want to ask you about this. You seem to be team play Tim Weah at right back.
So I wasn't until I watched him, put Rafael in his pocket, and I started thinking, man, it wouldn't be something that I hated. I'd like to see it because he clearly has the tenacity to do it and play defense. We've seen him, when he's playing winger, he is not afraid to come back and throw in some slide tackles, and he's got the motor. So the only thing is, if you play him there, who do you play as winger? So I started thinking about it, like, you know what, it's probably just going to be him and Pulisic as wingers, and Greg's going to go A-Rob at left and Scally on the right. But it does give you options, which is a really cool thing, especially, like I said, in a restricted roster like this.
Thomas, my question with the winger depth concerns is that make another case for a 3-back system. We have a right back that we're not super comfortable with. We don't have a lot of great wingers, and you can play Jedi as a left wing back, and then you have more options at the right wing back position to play them. Or do you think that it makes more sense to be as consistent as possible?
I mean, I think it really depends on the opponent a little bit too, but I think I kind of want to see it. I think we have the players that actually can play the roles, right? That have Way out of right wing back, to have Jedi on the left wing back. You know what I mean? And maybe you play 2 strikers. I mean, or one tucks underneath. You play as, kind of a secondary striker or whatever. You can mix it up a little bit. With that, I think you've got the talent to be able to have that flexibility. I just don't know if you've got the coach who can implement it, right? I think that's what I'm worried about. We just haven't seen it really. I mean, a couple times he's kind of run these things out there in the second half of a match, and you just haven't seen it enough. So I think I think it's actually be quite hard to try to implement that in your 2 friendlies heading into Copa America. I think that's the concern with that. You're just not going to really have enough time to put it in place because Greg's systems, are tend to be more complicated than they need to be.
That is true. A position that has seemed to be uncomplicated for all of us, the forward, the central attacker, if you will. We all have Valerian Balogun and Josh Sargent as 1 and 2. Caleb, you have Haji Wright listed as your 3rd. I'm including him in the depth chart because we obviously see him as playing and making this roster. But I do want to bring into the fact that we have multiple of us have Ricardo Pepi listed as the guy who won't be called in for the 23-man squad, but would be for a 26-man squad. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not even sure I'd bring him in because I kind of think we need to bring him to the Olympics if we want to actually perform well. And I think if you're going to try to get the most out of Ricardo Pepi and actually help him in his career, being a bench player at Copa America would be great. But if you could send him down or send him over to France and he is a central figure in a team that could make a semifinal run in that tournament, scoring lots of goals, because I think he would score lots of goals, I think that would be more important for him and maybe better for us in the long run. I could be crazy. I don't know, Caleb. What are you feeling with that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he could go wrong either way, to be honest. I have him as my rotational in the 26 because, I've got Haji in there because he can play both, and he's hot right now. We saw what he did versus Jamaica. So I've got him in there. But with Pepi, again, if you're going to look for a 24th, 25th, 26th guy, I mean, we've seen what he's done for the United States. He scores some big goals. Love the kid to death. But again, he's not one that I think is going to make or break the roster, whether he is or isn't on it. But I mean, yeah, I think either way, he's got a role to play this summer, and it's going to be a big role. If it's the Olympics, he'll be a big time leader on that team if that's the case.
So that is a good look at what we think will be our Copa America rosters. Thomas, one last question before we get out of here is, which position do you think is most likely to get those possible 3 extra spots used on? Is it one position that we might see 2 players brought in, say a right back? Is it possibly that we see it spread out among several? How do you think Greg will utilize those extra options?
Yeah, I think you're going to see an extra fullback. You're probably seeing an extra center back, and again, there's the versatility piece of it, right? We talk about the players that can play different positions. I think that's kind of help it. I mean, again, I think Aronson's one of the players. So either he's at central mid or winger, right? So I think I think to your point earlier, he's a 24th player, but in there. And the other, just the one point on Pepi is that, for me, if you can sell him the Olympics and he's okay with it, which is got to be a hard sell.
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing, right? He was left off the lot. I mean, he's kind of shown he should be part of this group, especially if you're 26 players. Like
he really has. I mean, like I can't say that he shouldn't be there. I'm just saying that I also look at the U23s and I go, who the hell is going to play striker?
Right. I mean, maybe you have a situation where the club says, oh yeah, he can be released for both or whatever, but I just don't see that happening in general. But he's in a weird position too, where he's probably not going to be with PSV next year. So he's got to kind of maybe showcase himself too. And so maybe both tournaments would provide that for him. I don't know. He's definitely a player that could do both, but that's my only point on that. I just you don't want to lose the player because he definitely has had some massive goals for this U.S. team in the last couple of years. So if you bring in 26, it's hard not to bring him, but it's yeah.
The thing is, though, we're talking about Berhalter, so that the 3 extras are going to be, it's going to be Shackmore, DeAndre Yedlin, and somehow a 4th keeper. Like, I don't.
It feels very that. You're not wrong.
If he brings Shackmore and Yedlin, I'm gonna lose it. Like, I'm just like,
I'm gonna burn my jerseys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they didn't release the provisional roster. I don't think. At least I didn't see it released, and I was told that U.S. Soccer is not going to release it. So, So I don't know. We don't know who's actually on that roster.
Yeah, the best we're going to have is what we saw for that provisional roster for Nations League. But I don't know. I mean, I'm with you that he's really important, and he's scored a lot of big goals for us, and I trust him more to be available than Josh Sargent, which is the other thing is, well, who knows if he's going to be available,
right, and that's the thing, right? I mean, you look at Josh Sargent's, I love him. He's up there, but his health and reliability just hasn't been there. So, like,
it's been crazy.
He could get injured during the tournament. You're like, crap, we should have brought Pepi as well, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it's going to be a little bit challenging of where you put in those pieces, because you're essentially going to be bringing 4 strikers, right? If you bring in, Balogun, Sargent, Wright, and Pepe, right? So that's hard too. So
Well, we will find out what these rosters will be, not just the U.S., but all of them very soon. They have to be submitted on June 12th, by June 12th. So again, the U.S. will play friendlies against Colombia on June 8th and then Brazil on June 12th. So it is most likely that they will use those friendlies as the tune-up with the full roster, and then if they have injuries, they'll use that to, June 12th, they'll be able to submit it by, I guess, midnight, and hopefully they'll have time for that. So yeah, that's what we'll know. Hopefully we're right about a lot of these things, but we will see. Thomas, thank you for joining me. You can follow him on Twitter at USKeeper. Caleb, welcome back. Glad to have you back in the fold and giving your takes. Follow him on Twitter at USMNT Keeper. He is going to be tweeting more now.
A lot more.
He is back. Thank you everyone for listening. I am Bart. I'm out.